We are thrilled to open our Contemporary Issues Forum season with Rebecca Costa. Rebecca is a sociobiologist, initially educated at the University of California, Santa Barbara. She has been described as a part sociologist, part biologist, part economist, part psychologist, and a successful entrepreneur. And I thought the best part of what they said was that they didn't say part entrepreneur. In her book, The Watchman's Rattle, Thinking Our Way Out of Extinction, Rebecca addresses the immense complexity of living in today's world. Issues such as global financial crises, environmental degradation, education and healthcare systems that appear stagnated all have us at a stalemate, gridlocked in our inability to solve any problem. We can identify the problems all too easily, but we seem paralyzed to take care of any of them. Rebecca proposes that we are experiencing an evolutionary process that limits our ability to problem solve. The title of the book, Watchman's Rattle, harkens to a time when the protectors of a community, the Watchmen, would carry a rattle to summon assistance when danger was perceived. Like the ancient Watchmen, Rebecca Costa is sounding the alarm. Today, Rebecca will not only talk with us about the gridlock and our evolutionary stage, but also propose strategies to help us address the challenges and move forward. Please join me in welcoming this golden retriever-loving, provocative furist to our stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear the mic? Are we on? I just want to take a moment to, first of all, thank the Chautauqua Women's Club. I didn't know about Chautauqua before, but I'm coming back. I just want to take a really short survey. And by the way, when I ask you this question, I'd like you to look around the room, because that's the important part of the survey. So how many of you have noticed, just maybe in the last, let's say, I'm going to give you 10 years, that things have gotten a lot more complicated? Raise your hand, please. Now look around the room. Okay, that's your therapy for today. Okay, you are not alone. I am not alone. I just happened to go see my financial advisor. He insists that I actually come and see him every now and then. I'd rather I didn't, but he likes to see me eye to eye to tell me how poorly things are going, so I won't blame him. And he starts to explain everything: derivatives, credit swaps, every possible thing. JP Morgan going down the tubes, what's going to happen with the euro. By the time he's done, my head is going to explode, but I find myself sitting there politely nodding, as though I understand. I don't understand. I want to be responsible for my financial future. I was raised that way. I'm not supposed to depend on the government. I'm supposed to put enough money away. I'm not supposed to move into the basement of my children. I really am trying. I'm trying very hard, and I'm struggling right now. And I know that you are too. Everywhere I go, in Washington, D.C., I'm talking to our leaders who, you know, I don't know if you remember seeing Nancy Pelosi put her hand on the top of the health care bill and saying, "I'm sure glad we passed it, so now we can read it and find out what's in it." Really? Really? You passed a bill and we don't know what's in it? Look, I'm not picking on Nancy Pelosi. General McChrystal a couple of years ago, many of you probably saw that press conference where he had this chart up and it had all these arrows circling around on every other thing. And it was as big as this backdrop. And he said, when we understand this, we will win the campaign in Afghanistan. And for just a moment, the camera switched on the media and the media stopped writing, and you could see they were thinking, oh no. We're in big trouble. So it's not just you and I, it's the leaders that we have, whether it's the national health care system, financial markets, midterm elections, how to fix election reform. It's complicated, it's difficult. You know, we could spend hours talking about the Citizens United. where a corporation is now a human being that can make unlimited contributions that don't have to be disclosed. Is that right? Is that what the Founding Fathers had in mind? It's so complicated. I don't know how I feel about these things. Now, if you listen to AM radio, there's a lot of guys on there that tell you exactly how you ought to feel. They know for sure what is happening. They can't possibly know, not if the smartest people in the world are confused. And I have the opportunity every week to talk to the thought leaders. I have a nationally syndicated radio program, and I talk to the smartest people in the world for 1 full hour, not 15 minutes, not 10 minutes, and they don't know what's going on. I asked Alan Dershowitz, how are we going to fund the national health care program? I've had it explained to me 1,400 times, and he's on my radio program, go to my website, and he goes, you know, Rebecca, I've had so many people explain it to me, I don't understand it either. One of our greatest legal scholars. Okay, so, I could go on and on with people that, what they tell me at lunch, off the program. I take them to lunch, and you can't believe what they tell me. Carl Eikenberry, our ambassador on the ground in Afghanistan. I have a full 1-hour interview with Carl Eikenberry. So after the interview, we go to lunch, and I say, what was it like the first 3 days when you arrive with your wife in Kabul, and they're hurling mortars at your compound? And he said, well, the generals come in with all those charts, all those diagrams, and as soon as they left, I threw them in the trash. It would have taken me years to understand the campaign they had in mind in Afghanistan. I said, call Karzai, I'll have lunch with him, we'll figure it out. That's what really happened, not what you think happened. We can't digest that kind of information. So now I'm a sociobiologist. What does that mean? It means when we start acting crazy, or sometimes when we act nice, I look for the evolutionary imperative. I look for what might have been in it for our earlier ancestors, because I don't believe we're just irrational by nature. I think there was some imperative, some benefit to our earliest ancestors, and that's why we act so the way we do. So it doesn't really matter if it's male infidelity. I say male infidelity because it's easier for me. I'm a female. So it's always the guys, right? No, it's not anymore. But whether it's infidelity, whether it's obesity, whether it's tribalism and warfare, these things go way, way back, millions of years. These are not recent phenomena, and we all know that. So when I look at our difficulties, I don't see economic and political obstacles. Everything you read in the media now, everyone you talk to will convince you that every problem we have, from education to climate change, is a political or economic problem. It is not. We are up against a biological obstacle. 153 years ago, when Charles Darwin discovered the principles of evolution, he was so marginalized because we thought that he was a man without faith. We thought that what he was introducing was a threat to faith. He was not. He was a man of faith. Instead of extracting the important laws of evolution, the ones that apply to you and me today in modern times, we marginalize the laws of evolution, and those are the most important principles that govern all life forms on this planet. And you are a life form. Therefore, you fall under those laws. And we got so far away from that that today we have to make a law to convince you that you cannot text and drive a 2-ton vehicle 60 miles an hour. Really? Do you need a law? You should be laughing your rears off about that. That we think that air traffic controllers can stay up for 48 hours and watch 200 planes? Do you remember a year ago we discovered they were falling asleep? How many remember they were falling asleep on the job? Raise your hand. Really? Well, I suppose if you give them more planes than their brain was able to handle and you ask them to stay up unreasonable hours, sleep might be one of the outcomes. So we've become very, very disconnected. So now I want to talk to you about what happens and why we become gridlocked. But I'm not going to frame it up as a political issue. I'm not going to frame it up as an economic issue. I don't believe it is. I believe we're up against the limits of what this biological spacesuit has evolved to handle. We can't handle certain things. You may not want to hear that, and I'm going to talk to you about some workarounds that you can implement right away that will allow you to cope better. But right now, we're up against some biological obstacles. So one way to think of this is two clocks. So let's think about the first clock, human progress. In the 1980s, Noyce, one of the founders of Intel Corporation, he wrote a really important article in EDN magazine. He'd written millions of articles, but this one was really important because he said, data densities will double approximately every 18 months. Now, as a sociobiologist, I had that taped to my wall till it turned brown, that article, and I thought, wow, the amount of data that I have to process to remain competent and be able to make a responsible decision is going to double every 18 months. Never mind the apparatus that'll get the data to me faster. Cell phones, smartphones, internet, all of this stuff. And I thought, how's that going to work? It turns out one clock is the clock of human progress. Every time the hand moves, it's a picosecond. Then we have the clock over here of human evolution. Every time the hand moves there, 1 million years, 4 million years, 5 million years. Now, we can argue about whether those two clocks are converging now, but if you just use pure, ordinary logic, sooner or later the two clocks must meet. Sooner or later, progress will outstrip the biological, the brain, the cognitive capabilities that you have. In fact, the last major evolutionary step we had happened about 4 or 5 million years ago. Now, this is important for later, but 4 or 5 million years ago, we became bipedal. We stood up on hind legs, and suddenly we could see and smell and detect our enemies from very far away. This was a huge evolutionary benefit. But it wasn't really a benefit unless we could do something. And we had kind of, I don't know, puny brains. They weren't smart at analyzing things. So over the course of 4 or 5 million years, if you go to the Natural History Museum, you'll see that the frontal brow of the human forehead gets larger and larger to accommodate something called the prefrontal cortex. That's the CEO. That's the one that makes all the intelligent decisions when you're not following your animal instincts. About 30% of the brain is the frontal cortex today. So what happens when complexity that we have to manage races ahead of the frontal cortex's capability to load content, process content, and make excellent decisions? Well, it turns out 3 symptoms appear. If you have read my book, and if you haven't, please go out and get it because I can't digest everything. I know I always sound like a salesperson at this point. I'm really not. If I could give you all a book, I would. The book is divided into 3 sections. One, I go back through history. I wanted to know if there were a bunch of Mayans or Romans walking around like you and I that were going, we've had these problems for a long time and our government doesn't seem to be getting on top of them. I wanted to know if there were just some ordinary citizens that were worried. And so I went back into the Romans, the Mayans, the Khmer, the Ming Empire. I looked at all of these societies to see if there was a point at which the complexity of the problems they had were larger than their capability to manage them. And what I discovered were 3 symptoms. So in the middle of the book, the center of the book, I talk about today. Some of the political, economic problems that we face today and why we can't get over them. And the last third of the book, I talk about what tools we have that those societies did not have, so we don't have to go through this repetitive cycle of ascension and collapse, regeneration, ascension, collapse, because we're in a cycle. It's just a long cycle. So what do we have today to solve that? So the first symptom that we notice very early on, and by the way, I'm not interested in the final event that causes these civilizations to collapse. I let historians and anthropologists and archaeologists work that out. I'm interested in the long drive toward the cliff, where everybody knows we're driving toward the cliff, and we don't do anything to turn the steering wheel. So that's what I'm interested in. So the first symptom that we see very, very early on is gridlock. These societies know what their most dangerous, threatening problems are. They're stacking up like planes, all trying to land on the same runway. They can see them, their leaders see them, and yet what you see them do is pass them from one generation to another as these problems begin to exponentiate.
They're getting larger, more ferocious, until they're the size of the Empire State Building, and they cannot be stopped. The momentum cannot be stopped. That is the first sign that we see that way predates collapse. The second sign, and by the way, I have a lot of people that said, we already passed the gridlock stage. Take a look at our problems. They've been around since I was a kid. Education, pandemic viruses, terrorism, security issues,